Yeah, sure. Okay, so first off, it's the realization if people are familiar with the front end and the back end. The front end being the first purchase that someone makes with you, and the back end being subsequent purchases, and generally often much more expensive purchases. It's the realization that in business, the profit comes from the back end. It comes from everything you sell a customer after they've bought once. It's the second purchase, and it's the big expensive things that you sell them. That's where the profit in the business comes from. And so it's very seductive to spend all your time on the back end. And really what a big launch is, for the most part, is you tapping into a lot of people's back ends because they're emailing their prospects, their customer base, and sending them over to you. So that's why you see very large amounts of money go there. And that's why, lots of people do it, and rightly so. But to have a ongoing business of your own where you're not reliant on anybody, you need to have a front end. And the front end, so if the back end is where the profits are, the lifeblood is in the front end. It's generating that first purchase. And I was sitting down, Michael Masterson wrote this book, Ready, Fire, Aim, and it's a great book, and I really recommend it to anybody who is interested in starting a business. I think it's one of the best books as it relates to building an online business, even though he doesn't really necessarily talk about online. He's talking about direct response. But one of the things that was very interesting, though, was that when I looked, he came and met with me. Well, we talk all the time, but we talked about a seminar that he was going to do on business building, which was the book was based on. And he wanted to get my opinion because he had never taught business. And so based on the fact that that's pretty much what I do all the time, he wanted to get my opinion of what he should cover. And so we talked for a bunch of hours about it. And from that conversation came the seminar and then the book. And so I think I'm in the book a couple times. But one of the things that in the book that he did that, we talked about was he mapped out how long it took for him to grow his companies, because he's got a company that is about $400 million now. That's Agora. And he had a company that did about $130 million a year in his 30s. And he's got God knows how many companies that do about $30 million a year. And what was really interesting about his chart, like showing the growth of these companies, was that for me, not necessarily for everybody, but when I looked at them, was that all of my companies started a lot faster than his. Like it might have taken him a couple years to get to the million mark. I don't think I've ever had a company that didn't get to the million mark in the first year. But whereas mine kind of topped off at 10 million, more or less, I got one other business at 12 million, but it was always like around that number. And I got there a lot faster than his. When his got there, his took off. So whereas my started at the plateau, his broke out. And the real difference is that he wasn't interested in this might not translate to everybody listening here. I mean, they'll understand it. They might not find themselves in that mindset, but he wasn't really that interested in some fast profits, because like fast profits that are not sustainable just build you a business that ultimately gets you into trouble, because most people fire people too slowly and everything else. And so they'll just watch all the money they made go away. So he wasn't really interested in having a business until he was certain that he could buy customers. And the idea with buying customers is that you're paying for advertising. So you're in total control of your destiny. Whether that's, and in today's, you'd be buying a customer if you get customers through pay-per-click, or you get them through solo emails, like, renting lists, et cetera, banners. I mean, you name it. But if you're paying for it and you have the ability to scale it upwards, that's what he was looking for. And the idea being that if the money's in the back end, you don't really need to make money on the front end, but you need to acquire customers on the front end. And it's the hardest part of marketing, actually, it's much harder to make a $45 sale to someone who's never heard of you before than it is to make a $2,000 sale from people that have heard of you. And so he wasn't interested in building a business until he had that nailed. And so I know there's probably people listening now that say, well, I don't really care if I ever nail that. If I can just make a bunch of extra money now, that'd be great. And if that's your goal, then that's cool. I'm not here to judge. But if you want to have something sustainable where you work for a while and then you build something and then ultimately it can live on without you, then you need to have this element in your business. You need to have a way of getting continuously new customers. And that can be through paid models, and it can also be through free channels too. I mean, my reports still get downloaded an awful lot. So we have a unique advantage from that perspective. But you need to have that model that of what you were saying of like, where do these people come from and what does it look like so that how you make your money. What's interesting is that I taught a course on theory of constraints. GPS was the name of it. And GPS, I modified theory of constraints for an entrepreneur. And most people I don't think are going to be that familiar with what theory of constraints is. But theory of constraints comes from manufacturing, and it's about all systems have one thing that are governing how effective that system is at any given point. And when you figure out what that one thing is, you've also found the leverage point. And business is a system, and so the idea is that you can apply that concept to a business. And I've applied it to business for years, but I taught that whole methodology.